It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. This show is brought to you by Audible.com. You go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. You can sign up for free tonight and get yourself a free audiobook. If this is the first time you're hearing our show, welcome. And please check out our website, OppermanReport.com, and you can see our member section where we have all kinds of exclusive content that is for members only. And also, too, if you like what you hear, please drop me a line at oppermanreport@gmail.com. Tonight we have a guest returning, Thomas Johnson, T.H. Johnson, and we had him on because he had written a couple of books and a movie, Pursuit of Exhibit 35 in the OJ Simpson murder trial and its hidden secrets, and also a video that he did, Serpents Rising, an independent investigation of the OJ Simpson murder trial. Now, we had Thomas on a little over a year ago, and me and Thomas got to talking and went on about 6 hours. As a matter of fact, when I reminded him tonight it was 6 hours, he was a little shocked at how long it was. But that show, we just re-uploaded it to the Ed Opperman YouTube channel, and we got so much response again. And during that conversation, we had talked about Geronimo Pratt. So everyone said, hey, invite him back and have him talk about Geronimo Pratt. So that's what we did. Thomas, are you there?
I'm here, and I want to thank you for inviting me to come back on. I'm very, very surprised that you tell me we were going for 6 hours. That just seems unbelievable. I certainly didn't have a plan to go beyond the 2 that I think you told me we would be doing. But nevertheless, you know, you can get in. This subject is so fascinating that you can just go on for hours and hours. So I'm glad you invited me back. Ask your questions.
Well, tell us about yourself first. Who is T.H. Johnson? How'd you get involved in all this?
Well, my role is, by title, Investigative Team Coordinator for the Ocean Medical Investigative Group. And this organization was created by my brother as well as myself. I guess I encouraged him to do so back either in the latter part of 1996 or the early part of 1997. My brother is a medical doctor in Los Angeles, California, Dr. Henry S. Johnson. And as many of us, he had been interested in the OJ Simpson murder trial, and it was in between the end of the criminal trial and right before the beginning of the civil trial, which he was in his office, and, you know, they were continuing to promulgate the Simpson aftermath of the Simpson trial, and my brother was heard to say by a patient in his office, you know, I wish I could examine the autopsy reports on Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. And the person who heard him say that was very surprised and just happened to be an individual who worked at the coroner's office. And so a few days later, these manila envelopes wind up on my brother's desk. And when he finished with his patient load that evening, he sat down and went through the autopsy reports. And a few days later, he called me at my office in Minneapolis, and he said, Tommy, you know, I've gone through these autopsy reports, and based upon what I reviewed from the doctor's explanation of his in the autopsy protocols, these people were not killed in the manner of the testimony that was given in O.J. Simpson's trial. And so with that, my brother went through an extensive, let's say, breakdown of what the original Dr. Irwin Golden had stated And another one of his patients, who was a lawyer that had been on CNBC Geraldo's program, I think his name was McNeil, he had an association with the civil attorneys of Simpson, and I think they were Baker and Blazer or something like that. And so I remember I was out in California at the time, and my brother invited me to come to the luncheon and just listen to how it would go. And I went to the luncheon meeting at the outdoor restaurant in Santa Monica. And when we ended, he asked me, what did I think of it? And I said, I feel that these guys, for all intent and purposes, are pipe and slipper attorneys. I don't see them being as aggressive as the lawyers in the criminal trial. And I said, and I do not think that they're going to call you to testify at all based upon your newfound discoveries. And certainly they did not. In essence, what I said to him came to pass. But they did call someone to present his interpretation. And that individual that they called was the doctor, the forensic pathologist that testified for the defense in the criminal trial. Do you remember his name? I can't remember his name off.
Was it Cyril Wecht or Bodden, one of those?
I think it's Michael Bodden.
Michael Bodden,
wasn't it?
yeah.
Yeah. So they called Michael Bodden to testify. And what my brother had concluded, based upon examining the forensic pathologist, Dr. Irwin Golden's measurements of the exit wounds, was that there were two distinctive types of knives involved, one being a single-edged knife, the other being a double-edged knife. And my brother's conclusion, based upon the direction of the exit wounds and the 4 stab wounds underneath Nicole Brown Simpson's left ear, with the sharp edge of the single-edged knife pointing over her shoulder and the dull edge of the knife pointing eyes forward, that the most likely assailant that attacked her was a left-handed assailant. As far as Ron Goldman's wounds were concerned, he appeared to at some point was simultaneously attacked by 2 individuals, one wielding a double-edged knife or dagger, where he was struck 23 to 24 times to the right side of his face and neck. Those were basically superficial wounds. They didn't go in deep enough to do any major damage. But one of the fatal wounds, my brother concluded, to the right side of his torso that went into his rib cage and nicked the bottom of his aorta, causing internal bleeding. He concluded that based upon the direction of the knife exit wound, that wound was delivered by a left-hander wielding a single-edged knife, thrusting it into the right side rib cage of Ron Goldman. So, with that said, that in essence became the beginning of what I told my brother at the time. I said, if you want to be heard, you're going to have to establish a foundation of your own. In other words, a platform of your own. And you're going to have to go from there. If you intend on delivering your findings to other people and they doing justice with them, I wouldn't put much hope into that. And so I guess he accepted that. And when I got back to Minneapolis, he called me a couple of weeks later and told me what he planned to do. And then he says, and you're going to be responsible for the investigative department, you know. And I guess my brother knows how I am, and I figured, okay, we're going to bump heads, but he selected me, and you know, maybe he knows that I'm going to watch his back, you know. So I decided that I was willing to take on the responsibility of investigative team coordinator, but I told him, and it has always been a general rule, I said that if I take on this position, in regard to evidence, no one and nothing will be given the privilege of presumption. And that's the way it's been. Now, that rule has caused a great deal of acrimony, even internally within our organization, because I've let people go at the end of the day that have come back after claiming that they've done their due diligence and said to me, well, I didn't do this or I didn't do that because I assumed this. And when they said that they assumed that evidence was this way or that way, I did just like Donald Trump. I said, you're fired. You can leave. And so that's the way it's gone. And I mean, even he and I have had some heated arguments at some time. In fact, I used to, when I would travel back and forth, because I would be in Los Angeles almost every week back during the 90s and so forth, as we were deeply involved in this investigation. I used to stay at my brother's residence, but I think this thing becomes so intense, at least with both of us and with several of our investigators as well, that he decided the next time that I came out there, he had a motel room waiting for me. So that's the way it's been. I mean, when I visit Los Angeles now, I usually stay at hotels and so forth, and sometimes that's in the best interest to keep peace in the family. But I love my brother very much, and I'll go to the wall for him, even though we disagree sometimes on certain things. But he knows that I'm there to look out for his back as he's there to look out for mine.
Well, let me ask you this, because you've devoted a huge portion of your life to this work. Who is funding this work? It's coming out of your own pocket?
I didn't hear you. Say it again.
Who is funding all this work? It's coming out of your own pocket?
Yeah, well, we've self-funded it.
Yeah.
My brother's had the capacity to provide for the needs of the organization and so forth, but I think we've all, and certainly I've been very, very cost-effective, cost-efficient in terms of everything that we do. And I think the difference between us and others is that we focus on doing our due diligence. And I think that other people who get concerned about how much money is being spent here or there, many of these people are people that get paid high salaries, but when you put them to the test and ask them, did they do their due diligence, these are the people that come back and tell you, well, I just assumed that such and such a thing was this way. And you tell them, well, go back. We don't take assumptions. Go back and find out. Then they want to get mad because, that's time consuming. So, it does cost, but we're cost effective. And I'm a very frugal individual because I make certain demands that you do your due diligence. And there's no excuses in terms of it. So in the end, I think that we're satisfied in terms of whatever amount of money that's been spent. And we have spent a lot of money relative to this matter. But I don't think, it may not be to other people as what it is to us. We take this thing personal. And I've expressed this with a number of people, including OJ Simpson, and told him that as far as I'm concerned, he's become the metaphor for the destruction of the African-American male in this country. So don't get it twisted. If I'm visiting with you, I'm not here as a fan or groupie of yours, because if you're waiting for me to be a groupie, by this time next year, you'll be standing around wearing nothing but a straw hat to cover yourself with. This is about business. And when I'm here to take care of business. Every minute of the day counts as far as we're concerned.
One thing I want to point out before we get too far off the subject is because you mentioned the autopsy and your brother's examination of the autopsy report and his willingness to testify as well. But one thing that I found so important in your work, and I read your book and I watched the video, and I'm very impressed, by the way, with the thoroughness of both. It's incredibly well documented and very thorough investigative work. But one thing that really struck me was that the prosecution never put on the actual medical examiner that performed the actual autopsy. They had a spokesperson from the office testify instead, which is, I've never heard of that before in my life.
Well, it is as confusing to us as it is to you. And the way that came about in my documentary was that after my brother had an anatomical skeleton hanging in his office, and one evening when I flew into Los Angeles, instead of going to our favorite restaurant or wherever our favorite watering hole in Los Angeles, we went directly to his office that evening. And, he pulled out, he had these knives. I don't think he had pulled them out yet. He asked me in the beginning, I think this was like October 1996. So this might have been right at the beginning of the civil trial. And he says, what did you hear? What do you know about how these people were murdered? And at that time, I was caught up in all of the sensationalism about Nicole almost being decapitated and first one thing and the other. And I said, yeah, well, I heard that a right-handed individual, using a single-edged knife, almost decapitated her. So my brother said, well, here's a single-edged knife. Go over to that anatomical dummy and show me how you would have performed that. And so I went over to the anatomical dummy and said, well, they were living in close quarters in this townhouse situation out here on 875 South Bundy. So it would seem to me that the assailant probably would come up behind the person, muffle their mouth, stick the knife up underneath their throat, and then rip it up across their throat and almost cut their head off. And so he said, fine. He says, now, look at this autopsy. Look at these autopsy diagrams. He said, you see these 4 stab wounds underneath the left side of the ear? Put those deep stab wounds into the neck. And so now I'm in confusion with my hand grasping this dummy and slitting the throat. He says, now that you slit the throat, he says, you slit the carotid artery, which is under 120 pounds of pressure. It's not the what's the most important vein that we always hear about?
Jugular.
The jugular vein.
Right.
Jugular vein is under 20 pounds of pressure. The carotid artery is under 120 pounds of pressure. And something under 120 pounds of pressure is like a water hose that's skeeting, blood everywhere. And now, within 2.5 seconds, you've got 130 pounds of dead weight in your arm. But in the meantime, show me how to stick these 4 stab wounds in the left side of the neck. So I'm envisioning this, a person 130 pounds, dead weight in my hands, and I'm kind of taking the knife and backhanding it across the body and trying to stick the knife into the left side of the neck 4 times underneath the left ear. And I said, okay, well, maybe they did it like that. Maybe they backhanded the knife into the neck, okay, after you slit the throat, okay. And my brother says, well, okay. He says, now, when you do that, tell me which way that the sharp edge of the knife is pointing, okay? And so when I did that, the sharp edge of the knife was pointing eyes forward. He said, look in the autopsy report. The forensic pathologist says that it's pointing over the shoulder. And so I said, go back and do it again. So I went back and tried to do it again, and ultimately out of frustration, I just kind of flipped the knife in the air, and my brother started laughing. He said, the odds, the probability of someone committing an attack like that, is worse. He says it's far further out than the DNA calculations. So that's when I said to him, how do you conclude that a person did it? He says, put the knife in your left hand. And then when I put the knife in my left hand, he said, can't you insert it 4 times into the left side of the neck? And I did. He said, can't you bring it up under the right ear and across the midline of the throat? And I did. And he says, what direction is the sharp edge of the knife pointing? Over the shoulder. And so that's where we concluded that it was a left-handed individual. So I said to him, how could this doctor who signed this autopsy report, me not even knowing who that doctor was, because I told him I watched the OJ Simpson. I saw the doctor on the Simpson trial testify. And he says, well, the doctor who signed this report is not the same doctor who testified during Simpson's trial. And when he told me that, you could have knocked me over with a feather, okay? And so I told him at that moment, I said, I have a friend in Minneapolis who is a retired librarian and a retired Army veteran of the Quartermaster Corps. And this guy is very meticulous about everything. And he started recording the Simpson trial for posterity because he thought it was going to be history-making from the preliminary hearing all the way to the end. So my brother said, well, when you get back to Minneapolis, it would be nice if you could get him to provide us the videotapes on the medical evidence. And after a week, that individual agreed and provided me with 6 tapes. 5 of the tapes was the longest prosecution witness called in the prosecution's case. And that was the substitute doctor, Dr. Sadhi Vajeswaran Lakshmanan. Okay. This doctor was on the witness stand for 9 days. So tapes 54, 55, 56, 57, 58 were of Dr. Lakshmanan. And then the 6th tape was designated with a single digit, number 5. And that tape was the testimony during the preliminary hearing of the actual doctor who performed the autopsy, which was Dr. Irwin Golden. And in the testimony, when I plugged it into my recorder and I heard Dr. Golden testify, he's stating on the witness stand that based upon his morphological examination of the bodies, he found that 2 distinctive types of knife wounds were on the victim's body. Number 1, a double-edged knife, and number 2, a single-edged knife. Then I flip over to the tapes with Dr. Lakshmanan, who came in as the substitute doctor that the prosecutors brought in. He testifies that he believed that only one knife, a single-edged knife, wielded by a right-handed individual, was used to commit these murders. And then further under testimony, if you see in the documentary, under cross-examination, you hear Shapiro ask him, says, were you ever involved in performing these autopsies? He says no. He was never involved in performing the autopsies. He didn't even see the victims' bodies, okay? He also testified that he didn't even go out to the murder site until 6 months after the murders had occurred. Then you hear the piece that we keep in the documentary for dramatic purposes is where you hear under cross-examination, Shapiro asked him, how many times this year have you testified for a doctor who's already performed the autopsies and was available? And you hear Dr. Lakshmanan say, never. He says, how many times last year did you testify when the doctor who performed the autopsy was available? You hear him again say, never. How many times in the 15 years that you've been the chief medical examiner for Los Angeles County, one of the largest counties in the United States, have you testified when the doctor who actually performed the autopsy was available? Now you hear him stumble a little bit and he says, well, I never have testified. Wait a minute. I have testified to supplement the original testimony of a doctor, but to tell you the truth, to answer your question, no, never.
Amazing. And I just want to point out, too, that in this video and in the book, Pursuit of Exhibit 35, the OJ Simpson murder trial and its hidden secrets, and in the video, Serpents Rising, an independent investigation of the OJ Simpson's murder trial, they act out this. So they have you and your brother acting this out. And they have diagrams, too, of the autopsy. So it really makes all of this very clear to you. That, and now, when we discussed this last time, I asked you, well, why do you think they didn't do this? Would be the smoking gun for the defense to jump all over this.
Yep.
And I think that's when you brought up your theory that you felt that it was kind of a payoff for the Geronimo Pratt situation.
Yes, I did. Let me put it like this. You said that I think you told me at one point, and I don't know if we were on the air or not, that you did make contact with Stephen Singular.
Yes.
And his book became an important wedge in this puzzle in terms of reinforcing what we allege to be the malfeasance that has taken place in this whole Simpson matter, you see. Because Singular had been visited in Denver, Colorado, less than a month and a half after these murders took place by an insider, an anonymous insider within the Los Angeles Police Department that knew things about this murder case that nobody knew about at the time. And Singular was asking him, why me? Why did you search me out over in Denver? What can I do to be of benefit to this major affair that is unfolding in Los Angeles, California? And that anonymous insider said that he did not trust the official infrastructure, the justice system in Los Angeles County, that it was so corrupt that he could not afford to bring this information to certain officials within Los Angeles County. And the reason that he had reached out to Singular is because Singular had already written a book about 8 years before called Talk to Death, about how a faction of a neo-Nazi organization up around northeastern Washington, northwestern Idaho, around Coeur d'Alene and some of those other areas up in there that are noted for the Aryan organizations. This group called the Order had come down to Denver on their way to Washington, D.C., as I understand, to create national turmoil by assassinating African Americans and Jews and whoever else they considered to be antithetical to their point of view. So on their way to create all of this chaos, they executed this Denver talk show host by the name of Alan Berg. And so this anonymous inside person within the Los Angeles Police Department had told Singular that he had read this book, that his associates had read this book. And this is why they were reaching out to Singular, okay? And that he was advising Singular that there was a neo-Nazi sympathizing group in the command positions within the Los Angeles Police Department that were protecting certain officers who had a tendency to act in a corrupt and brutal manner towards individuals that they detained in Los Angeles County. And so based upon that, and he further said that when these officers retire, these veteran officers have a tendency to retire to this same area up in northeast Washington and northwest Idaho, where these groups reside as their headquarters. So this is what piqued Singular's interest, and thus Singular, based upon his first visitation in the park in Denver on August 8th, 1994, was given information that only an insider would know, that the glove that was found on Simpson's residence on Rockingham had been placed there by a certain police officer. And with that glove, you would find a certain piece of evidence, a piece of plastic, blue plastic in color, that represented the same blue plastic that the Los Angeles detectives used to collect evidence and place in evidence bags. And that this particular officer, once he had gotten over to Simpson's house a second time, and this was the most important aspect of it, that Simpson's house was not visited just one time on Rockingham in that early morning hour after 5 o'clock in the morning, once the senior detectives arrived there, Van Adder and Lang, that at approximately 2:30 or 2:45, when the junior officers from the West Side Division had been told that they were taken off of the case, that they must wait there for the senior officers from the, I guess it's called the SID, Special Investigative Division, arrived from downtown. They claimed that they were standing in the street for an hour. And under cross-examination, I remember F. Lee Bailey asking that question. You mean you guys just stood out in the street for over an hour doing nothing? The investigation came to a halt. And I think it was Furman that was on the witness stand. He said, yeah. He said, for all intent and purposes, yes. The investigation from 2:45 in the morning until approximately 4:15, an hour and a half, just came to a halt. We were out in the middle of the street just talking. Well, according to the LAPD insider that was talking to Singular over in Denver, these individuals went to Simpson's house on Rockingham at that time, attempting to find evidence. And apparently they got into an argument over there because the woman next door, I think her name was Lopez, heard individuals arguing, squabbling. And I think that the argument was that they had left the crime scene and gone into another crime scene, another potential crime scene. And that's a no-no. You don't do that. You know, you're contaminating another crime scene. If you read the book by, what is his name, William Deere, you know, that tries to pound a square peg into a round hole or a round peg into a square hole with his book, OJ is Innocent and I Can Prove It, and just shifts the blame on the Simpson's son.
Right.
You know, he contacts these members of Scotland Yard, and they kind of tell him in a polite manner that, you're nuts. But something else that they said, which was fascinating and very professional, is that if you considered Bundy to be one crime scene and you had any idea that Rockingham was a second crime scene, the set of officers at Bundy would not be the set of officers that would be at Rockingham. And that on either crime scene, these detectives would be wearing the proper gear so that you would not be contaminating the site. And if you look at the photos and so forth of each of those situations, you'll see that none of those officers were wearing protective gear. And not only did they go on to and step over blood and so forth at the Bundy murder site, they got in the car later that morning after 5, claiming that they were going to go over to Simpson's and alert him that, we need to protect you because somebody might be looking for you as well since they killed your wife. That was about as believable as a big pink elephant, but that's what they alleged. But according to the insider, when they went there the second time, and Mark Fuhrman was able to get away from Van Adder and Lang in the house, that's when that glove was deposited on the property at Rockingham. So his book, Legacy of Deception, based upon this information from the LAPD insider, puts the burden on Mark Fuhrman as planning that glove over at Simpson's Rockingham residence. So Singular carried that information to the defense in Los Angeles. And the defense, very busy with thousands of leads and all this stuff coming in and so forth, kind of dismissed Singular initially. But when Singular put him to the test, based upon what he had been told, go down to the police property department, you will find that they collected this evidence, and with this glove, they took photos, and next to this glove, you will find this blue piece of plastic. The defense investigators did that, and they brought that information back to Carl Douglas and Johnny Cochran and said, yeah, we found that information. And that made them become more serious about what Singular had told them. So they invited Singular, out of the thousands of people, they invited Singular to come back to L.A. and give them some more to prove that this wasn't just a fluke, that this wasn't just a toss of the dice. So Singular goes back to his anonymous source, and the anonymous source tells him, you tell them to check blood swatches. I'm going to call the numbers 47 and 48. I can't remember now. You'd have to pull up Legacy of Deception and see what numbers they were. But he says, you check those numbers on those blood swatches, and you will find that those blood swatches that were allegedly collected from the gate of the murder site, you're going to find that blood, supposedly Simpson's blood, will contain a blood preservative called EDTA, which is contained in a purple capped vial. And according to Singular, none of these people had a clue about the various types of blood preservatives that were found in these different vials and so forth, some purple cap, some yellow cap, some red cap. He had to attain the time of a blood specialist, I think at the University of Colorado or at a blood hospital over in Colorado, in Denver, Colorado, to explain to the defense team, including Barry Scheck and Johnny Cochran and the rest of them, the meaning of EDTA and how to test for it, and how delicate the test was in terms of what you had to do to actually determine whether this blood preservative in its high concentration that is used to coat the blood vials would be found in this blood. And so the defense, though it had been given just a small amount of this blood, maybe because of that, they did not want to take the chance. I don't know, why they didn't test for it. It was the prosecution who found out about Singular sharing this information with the defense. And they found out about Singular sharing this information with the defense because Singular in 1994, before the actual criminal trial even got underway, by a month, in fact, 2 months, November, because the trial didn't get underway until January of 1995. In November of 1994, Singular had delivered a treatment, a pre-manuscript to Michael Viner of Dove Books, and said, I'd like a contract to write this book, And Michael Viner, after reading the treatment and talking with his attorney, was advised by his attorney that you better take this information to the prosecution. You shouldn't be holding on to this information and keeping it secret. You should take this to the prosecution. So the prosecution found out that Singular had this book proposal with Dove Books, and he had been talking with the defense. So they started leaning on Singular, putting pressure on him to try to give up the name of the anonymous source, and Singular wouldn't do it. So in the midst of all of this, one of the prosecuting attorneys out of Alameda County, California, that was loaned to the L.A. prosecutors as a specialist in DNA, his name was Rockney Harmon, had decided that he was going to embarrass Singular and show the world that Singular was a charlatan. So Rock Harmon announced that he was sending the Simpson collected blood off to the FBI labs to prove that it didn't have this blood preservative EDTA in it. But a few months later, after the test had been done at the FBI labs in kind of a haphazard manner by the FBI special agent, I think his name was Roger Martz, if I'm not mistaken. Martz, I know his last name was Martz. He came back and testified under oath. Did you find the blood preservative EDTA in those blood samples? And reluctantly, he had to answer, yes, he did. And so that's what started the whole thing in regard to the EDTA situation. Now,
no, wait 1 second. Didn't the prosecution then claim that EDTA is a common chemical that's found in laundry detergent, and that's why it was in the blood sample?
They tried to, but then Singular took that issue, it became prominent when it came out, because whenever it came out, it became a prominent theme. They were trying to, oh my God, we done made a mistake here. We shot ourselves in the foot by having the FBI test for this stuff. So now we got to say that it's a common occurrence in blood. But again, going back to the blood specialist in Colorado, he said, and you read in Singular's book, Legacy of Deception, that anybody with that concentrated amount of EDTA that's found in those purple cap blood vials would be dead. DOA, dead on arrival. So, what else were they going to say? It's almost like they were almost caught up in a situation like the glove experiment that Chris Darden later tried, when we were all sitting up there looking at OJ struggling to put his hand in the glove. Naturally the people looking at that were saying, well, wait a minute, doesn't look like this guy's hands fit in those small gloves, So I think that was kind of the situation that they were in relative to the EDTA finding, because Rockney Harmon was so vociferous in terms of his commitment to get rid of Singular, to show him as being a charlatan. we're going to get rid of you. We don't need you over here. We got 1,000 charlatans trying to sell us something about the Simpson case. I mean, Singular was so significant that Chris Darden committed 4 pages in his New York Times bestseller, In Contempt. From pages 174 to 178, he talks about the significance of Stephen Singular to what he felt would be the defense's case. So, for all that's worth.
Well, that's worth a lot, because let me tell you something, because I'm glad you fleshed out all that Stephen Singular stuff. I had Stephen Singular on the show late one night for 1 hour. I had him on. He was great. But he was a little rushed, because he had just come back from a long trip, and he could only give me an hour. And then I tried to get him to stay a little bit longer, but he was just really tired. So he just kind of laid out his story. Very good. Excellent narrative. But I could tell he was tired, and he wasn't very interested in going through a lot of questions. So the interview is available. It's up there on the Ed Opperman YouTube channel. And I'll lump them all together, all these interviews together, so people can really sit down.
I'm gonna pull it up. I'd like to hear it. I reached out for him after reading his book.
Yeah.
I got the book that I got of his. I like to go to Amazon myself and order books. One will say, okay, you can get this brand new for $30, and here's one you can get for $5. Even with mine, if I find one for $3.99, I'll probably get that one.
Right.
And so I ordered this book, Legacy of Deception. It was kind of ragged, but it was good. I read it all the way through, and I said, wow, I'm going to reach out for this guy. So I try to look him up, and I find that he has a Facebook page, and I messaged him on his Facebook page and said how moved I was by reading his book and so forth, and I guess either contacted me back on Facebook or I left my email address, and he got back to me and he says, listen, I very rarely go to my Facebook page. He says, here's my email address. And then we started communicating via email, and the first thing he says is that I felt like I've been entombed for the last 19 years, and you've come along and dug me up. And man, that blew my mind right there. That here's a guy that came to the table with some significant information, and he was blown off. Not so much by the prosecution, because he was told not to go to the prosecution by the insider. He was blown off by the dream team, by Johnny Cochran's, particularly Johnny Cochran's chief of staff, Carl Douglas, according to his book. And we talk on occasion now via internet, via email, and Stephen, he's written about 14 different true crime books. So I guess once he felt that they had shut him down and entombed him and so forth, he really did not get into any more depth of this stuff. He was just kind of angry about how this thing was going. He really got into a heated situation with Carl Douglas and Cochran, because he didn't think that, with Douglas, I know it was, because he said that he didn't think that, he thought that the evidence should be the issue, that the planted glove, the blue plastic found with the planted glove, that should be the issue. That could undermine this case. And according to him, Douglas was focusing on the racial factor. And his thing was, the racial factor could be one of the most destructive things if you focus on that by itself. And so I think in the end, he felt disheartened because they had kind of used him and pushed him away. Okay. And so I've shared with him over time that we go back to the Cochran thing, that I felt that Cochran may have had other ulterior motives.
Okay, before we get to that, I want to stick with Singular for a couple of seconds.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because you know what you're telling me really fleshes out my interview with Singular so amazingly. Like I got bells going off in my head. Because I remember him telling me, he says, you know what? Because I think I had Ramona Africa on right before him. She was the woman from that group Move in Philadelphia that was burned alive, and she escaped with the little boy Birdie, and they shot at her when she was escaping. I had her on first, and I had Singular on right after her.
Right.
And I remember he told me he had a long drive home to make it, so he could only give me an hour. And I bet you, during that long drive, he was steaming, reliving this experience that you're describing. Because when he did the show, I could tell there was an undercurrent of anger in him, and he was very frustrated and angry about how people did not understand the true story of OJ Simpson and how he was trying to get this out, and so many people are misled. Here's the anniversary coming out, and people are still going to be repeating this nonsense narrative from all these years ago.
Right.
So what you're saying, that just totally fleshes that out. And it gives me a whole different perspective to the interview. But one thing that was interesting to me is with Singular is when I brought up a relationship, like a prior relationship between Nicole and Furman.
Yeah.
He totally dismissed it. He didn't even want to discuss it. He didn't even want to acknowledge the question, almost, you know? He did not want to hear that at all. Now, what do you know about that?
Well, I'm certain, I don't know why, I don't know what the reason is that he would do that. And, you know, number one, but his focus wasn't there.
Right.
Ours is. Our focus is on everything. Okay. And I tell him that, you know, he Singular can kind of have some issues too with other authors. See, we're not only in the trenches. We haven't only been in the trenches ourselves doing the due diligence in the court archives and so forth, and the files and so forth, digging this stuff up, and first one thing and the other. It's been valuable to us as well to read the biographies of all of these people who were involved in this case, who wrote these books, you see, to read the court transcripts, the testimony of individuals involved in this. Now, one individual that I hold up, and I hold Singular up higher than my own pursuit of Exhibit 35, which, when I look at it, is like a 500-page compendium, because when I did it, I had no clue other than I was just getting everything out of me that I had been in the trenches digging up for the last 15, 20 years, okay? So that's what I was getting out of it. It's 17 years, whatever it was, because it came out in 2011. That was my first book. The documentary, I finished that in 2004, and then it went into the film festival circuit in the in the early spring of 2005, starting with the Pan-African Film Festival in Los Angeles. So, but Singular, I have to elevate to the top because he was first, and he was first with crucial evidence that these people try to dismiss. They can't get away from it, okay? Evidence that he was confirming other evidence that we had been finding, okay? Now, Singular's findings about the neo-Nazi sympathizers within the Los Angeles Police Department, particularly in command positions, is similar to what Deputy DA Lucianne Coleman states in her depositions. You acquainted with that name?
Yes, I am. And they even found a swastika, a Nazi flag, in one of these offices, correct?
Right. Here's the way that went. Lucy Ann Coleman was the complaints officer in the DA's office, where other police officers would come and lodge complaints about police misconduct within the police department. One of the first officers that came to her was an officer detective by the name of Andy Purdy. He was in the same division with Mark Furman on the west side. Purdy came to Lucy Ann Coleman right about the time that OJ was being, arrested during that first week that he arrived back from Chicago, and everything was hot on the air and all of that kind of stuff about the murders of these two victims. And so I guess there had been a remark about Mark Furman possibly being involved in malfeasance and planting evidence or something like that. And Lucy Ann Coleman says, "Oh, that's absurd. Guy, come on." And Detective Purdy says, "Well, wait a minute now. I wouldn't go that far. If anyone could be involved in doing something like that, he would be my choice." And then he began to outline his complaint against Furman in terms of some of the stuff that he had been allegedly doing in the precinct. He said that Furman was upset with him because he had married a Jewish woman. Okay. And Furman was this guy that he claimed paraded around the precinct on the weekend wearing Nazi paraphernalia. And that at some point in time after he came back from his honeymoon, he had a swastika placed in his locker.
Right.
And so Lucy Ann Coleman called in the internal affairs to check on this thing. But the Simpson thing was winding up, and Mark Furman was kind of at the center of this thing, and I'm sitting here reading his book right now, and the fascinating thing about his book is that based upon the first 30 pages into it, he finds everything. I found this, I found that, I found the glove, I found the blood drops, I did this, I did that. I said, wow, man, this guy, he's got, a very, very powerful narcissistic personality. Mm. But be that as it may, this guy, Andrew Purdy, had come in and lodged his complaint. And so Lucy Ann Coleman, when she called in internal affairs, and all of the media was now focusing on Mark Furman being the Dudley Do-Right that had, that had made the discovery of the glove over at Rockingham, she goes to Marcia Clark and says, Marcia, I've known you for 19 years. We've been friends and so forth here. I'm going to advise that you hold down, slow it down. Don't throw your arms around this guy, Mark Furman, until this internal affairs investigation is completed. Well, Marcia Clark didn't take too well to that. So according to Lucy Ann Coleman's deposition, Marcia cussed her out, talked to her bad, accused her of trying to usurp her case, and said that she was tired of people infringing upon her case, blah, 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 And so, Lucy Ann Coleman said that she was shaken by how she was handled in that situation. And so as time went on, she said that she even came under duress by the internal affairs officers, who now began to focus on her, having some motive about having them do the investigation on Furman. So things got very, very raggedy, very pointed, and uncomfortable for her to be in that position at that particular point in time, and so intimidating not only to her but to other deputy DAs in the district attorney's office who were kind of acting like they were afraid to walk on eggshells in that office. So Lucy Ann Coleman's testimony under deposition is very, very powerful, in terms of examining the Nazi allegations. But on the day that she was to testify in open court, if I remember correctly, all of the attorneys went to sidebar with Judge Ito, and I think she was sitting. In fact, yeah, she was on the witness stand. But before they got to having her testify, they reached an agreement at sidebar, and they told her she can stand down and she can leave. So we never heard from Lucy Ann Coleman.
But was there a stipulation of that she saw this Nazi flag and this and anything? Was there any kind of stipulation that they put into the record?
It's in the record in terms of the deposition that she gave prior.
Gotcha. Okay, right. So they submitted her deposition into the record.
Right. Now you can read that.
Yeah.
But I'm going to answer your other question because you asked about Furman's intimacy with Nicole. I think, didn't you hint at that?
Yes, I did. But this is a good time to take a break because, listen, you're doing so good. I'm at the edge of my seat here that we skipped the first commercial break. So we got to take a commercial break. But we are here with the fascinating T.H. Johnson. He's the author of, first of all, the movie producer of Serpents Rising, an independent investigation of the OJ Simpson murder trial, and the author of A Pursuit of Exhibit 35 in the OJ Simpson murder trial and its hidden secrets. We did 6 hours last time, okay? And then I did an hour with the singular, and we've just totally fleshed out the whole singular interview to such a point that I can't believe it. So we're going to be getting into more. We're going to get into the stuff by Nicole and try and get into some stuff by Geronimo Pratt, which is what I promised the audience the show was going to be about, but maybe we'll just retitle it, okay? But we'll be right back after these messages.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Tonight we have with us T.H. Johnson. We should call him Professor Johnson because the guy is just a fascinating expert on the O.J. Simpson trial. The movie producer of the video Serpents Rising, an independent investigation of the O.J. Simpson's murder trial, and also another book called Pursuit of Exhibit 35 in the O.J. Simpson murder trial and its hidden secrets. Now, Thomas, I'll give you a little background on this. You and I did our show, and then after that, I was doing a series of shows about the Atlanta child murders, and there was a woman who was doing a lot of research in that area as well. And when I mentioned I was having Stephen Singular on the show, and we were going to be talking about Mark Furman, she contacts me on Facebook, this woman, who I had known her previously through her research in this other case, and she was a listener to the show. And she starts telling me, oh, I befriended Mark Furman on Facebook, and we became friendly. And she says, I believe that he had a relationship with Nicole. And then she also went on to say that he never got over it, and he had really, really extreme anger issues. So I was all excited. I brought her on the air. I tried to bring it up to Singular, and he didn't want to have it. But I think, like I said, I think he was in a really bad mood that night. I think just like you said, he had felt frustrated and beaten down and abused over that case, and he was steaming as he drove home because it was like a long drive, he told me, but it was like a 3-hour drive. And I bet he was steaming the whole way. And then when he did the show, he was just so frustrated. He kept saying, and no one knows the truth about this case, and I'm trying to tell everybody. So I tried to bring up the thing about Nicole, and he wasn't having it. Then she called in after the show, and she wouldn't come out with what she knew. She was afraid to talk about what Furman had told her. Now, what do you know about that?
Well, the only thing that I know is what I've read. And again, I go back to Lucy Ann Coleman's deposition
Okay.
And in her deposition, she states that another detective had come into their office and had reported to another deputy DA who brought that detective to Lucianne Coleman and said, listen, this officer has something to tell you about Mark Furman as well. And according to this particular detective by the name of Maxwell, and I think he was an African-American detective, according to him, he had been at some type of police barbecue or something like that where Furman was bragging about having been close enough to examine the boob job. In other words, the medical breast job that had been done on Nicole.
Right.
And so that became part of the testimony in this particular deposition. But my friend Joseph Bosco, the late Joseph Bosco, who I had an opportunity to communicate with online a couple of times in a particular group. I think he had a blog site online, and we had communicated a couple of times before he passed away. But he has a very important book that I rate highly as well, called "A Problem of Evidence," that came out. It was one of the first books that came out back, and I think his came out around either 1995 or early 96. And in his book, he also talks about this alleged intimate relationship that Mr. Furman had with Nicole Brown Simpson. So that's basically all that I know about it. I don't know anything other than that. And certainly if he did have that type of relationship, it certainly would have been a major factor and major concern relative to this whole matter, the credibility of this person related to this matter, But other than it's a fascinating subject, but they don't get that deep into it other than to say the allegations was that this guy was intimately close to Nicole Brown Simpson, and that that other officers used to razz him about it at a pub where they used to drink at from time to time, that something about your girlfriend, this or that, and Maxwell coming in to tell his part about Furman allegedly talking about how nice her breasts were after the boob job had been done, after the medical procedure had taken place. So I really can't tell you any more than that. I hadn't focused on it any more than that, other than, if he did have an intimate relationship with her, it certainly should be something that should be taken into consideration in terms of being a factor in this whole affair. But there are other wedges of this pie that should be taken into consideration as well.
Okay.
And, I think that maybe, I don't know if it's Singular's book or if it's Bosco's book, or, I've gone through so many of these at this point in time, but one of them that I had gone through tends to point to how sometimes these officers may overreach in terms of bridging the gap. If they consider someone to be guilty, and they don't have the proof and the evidence to actually conclude that they're guilty, they may pad the books a little bit. you know. So Furman may have been involved in that, and these others may have been involved in that. You know, that's that particular issue. But as far as those that one should consider as being the murderer or involved in the murders of these individuals, that's an area of my concern, where this police department and Los Angeles District Attorney's Office just decided that they weren't going to do any further due diligence, that they were going to just simply stop and put the blame on OJ Simpson. And I think part of that is related to the fact that they have these cases which they consider to be high-profile cases. And some of these attorneys compete like football players or rugby players out on the playing field, trying to get hold of the ball and run up the field. I'm going to get my hands on this case. And I think that this is the situation that occurred in this situation here. Because if you look at how Marcia Clark came into this case, under normal circumstances, she should never have been designated as the prosecutor in this case. Because if you read Joseph Bosco's book, he tells you that based upon his investigation, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office has a setup. They have a hotline that if police officers at a crime scene are in need of a deputy district attorney to be out at that crime scene, there's a hotline for them to call. And there are designated DAs that are scheduled to be on duty to deal with that hotline on that particular occasion. Marcia Clark was not on that hotline. Marcia Clark got her call directly from Phil Van Adder the morning that he arrived at the murder site. He called her directly at his house and told her, I got a hot one over here. You need to get dressed and come on over here. And so that's why I think that she became so protective of that case, even though she didn't have all of the evidence, even though Lucianne Coleman was telling her, you need to go slow on this situation in embracing Mark Furman. She was determined to go straight ahead. So all of what that would lead to as far as our investigation is concerned is later on up the line, when we started finding irregularities related to evidence that supposedly came into the Simpson case, but did not come in a direct manner, but came in indirectly by stipulation, by lawyers agreeing behind closed doors. This is what we will say. And if we stipulate to this will allow this evidence to circumvent the examination of the jury or the triers of fact. And on the 14th day of the actual criminal trial is where you hear that stipulation come in regard to one of the most crucial pieces of evidence in this case.
What's that?
Exhibit 35.
The phone records.
The Brown phone records. And on that particular day, when the prosecution, Marcia Clark, puts up this graphic poster board that has at the bottom of it this 937 phone call, you will see Robert Shapiro stand up and in an inaudible tone say, since this witness, since we don't believe that this witness, Karen Crawford, who was employee at the Messaluna restaurant, can attest to the accuracy of this telephone time, we will stipulate that phone time represents the actual time that the phone call came in. Okay? Now, that's what he did on February 7th. But what most people don't know is that 8 months earlier, on July 8th in 1994, in the closed chambers of Judge Kathleen Kennedy Powell, on the last day of the preliminary hearing at 12:05 in the afternoon, Robert Shapiro was offering another stipulation because she asked him, we're ending today. Is there anything that the defense, is there anything else that you'd like to offer? And he says, no, there's nothing else that we'd like to offer, but I would like to offer a stipulation that that final telephone call came in at 10:17 p.m. Okay? So now that's 2 times that Shapiro has spoken about the telephone time. The original time that was stated was 11 p.m., and that was stated to Detective Lang at 7 o'clock in the morning when he called Lou Brown and them at their home in Dana Point. And he asked them, when was the last time that you knew your daughter to be alive? And Lou Brown said on the 13th that morning, about 10 hours after these murders took place, or whenever they took place that night, the night before. He said, my daughter was alive last night talking to her mother on the telephone about glasses that she had left behind. 3 days later, on June the 16th, 1994, Robert Shapiro had been approached earlier in the day by his own defense investigators. And they said, you know, this girl's mother told us that she was on the phone. She had called her at 11 o'clock that evening. You better go talk to her. So Shapiro goes to talk to Juditha Brown on the 16th of June. He said, when was the last time that you talked to your daughter? I called my daughter at 11 o'clock the night when I got home. He says on page 33 of his book, Search for Justice, how do you know it was 11 o'clock? And she said, well, when I got home, I looked at the clock. That's how I knew it was 11 o'clock. And then he goes on later down the line on that same page. But later we found out that the time was earlier. Well, you found out the time was earlier. When did you find out? Because on July the 8th, you were in Judge Kathleen Kennedy Powell's chambers based upon the transcripts that we got in Judge Kennedy's chambers from Arnell Sims, the court stenographer who took the conversation in there. You weren't offering 11 o'clock. You offered Marsha Clark a stipulation to that time being 10:17 p.m. And because Marsha Clark says, when she says, is that okay with the people? Marsha Clark says, yeah, it's okay with the people if that's what the record says. But what does the record say? And Shapiro says, I'm talking about the record that you gave me last week in open court when you stopped us from going to lunch. And so Judge Kennedy Powell, to put down the acrimony, says, well, hold on now. I'm going to seal the record until you people can get your heads together and mutually decide what the time was. Now, I'm asking you, what is the big issue about a telephone call, a telephone record? My telephone record, your telephone record, all of our telephone records look the same. We shouldn't have to debate whether a time was 11 p.m. or 10:17 p.m. or 9:37 p.m. You see, we're not talking about something that's abstract. When you get a telephone bill based upon whatever calls you've made across this country, you can look at your statements and you know what they are. But to this day, neither you, I, or the jury has had an opportunity to review those records. Because you know why? Those records were removed from the Simpson case file by a secret, surreptitiously issued court order issued by Judge John H. Reed to the lead prosecutor in this case, William Hodgman. Okay? Now, the significance of this whole thing is that when you turn the telephone time back from 11 o'clock to 10:17, 40 minutes, another 40 minutes to 9:37, and you say that you left Brentwood, which is a bedroom community, to Santa Monica, and you say you have 3 witnesses in the Messaluna restaurant that say that you left there at 8:45 in the evening, approximately 8:45 in the evening, you're not going to arrive at the southern end of Orange County in Dana Point by 9:30 to make a 9:37 phone call. In other words, you're not going to make that distance in 45 minutes. That's in 1994. That was at least, and that's what Detective Van Adder and Detective Lane say on page 28 of their book, Evidence Dismissed. How far did the Brown family live from Brentwood? Detective Van Adder says the Brown family lived at least 90 minutes away. And then you roll 114 pages further in their book, and they put up the same diagram chart that you see in other situations where they say the Brown family left the restaurant at approximately 8:45 and arrived to make the 9:37 phone call at 9:37. Well, the time between 8:45 and 9:37 is 52 minutes. But you said on page 28 of your book that, quote, the Brown family lived at least an hour and a half away from here. And in 1994, based upon the evidence that we have now from the California Department of Transportation, who was so taken aback about these allegations of them arriving there in 45 minutes to make that call, they said that didn't happen. Not on that night. Not on June the 12th, 1994, not at that hour. And they provided us with all of the traffic data, the traffic volume, and the traffic density for that night between 8 and 9 p.m. when the traffic volume on the freeway at that time on the southbound freeway of the I-405 was running at 90% of the normal work week rush hour, at 90% of the capacity of the normal work day rush hour. So this is what you were faced with in terms of that situation. And all of these people are involved in terms of concealing. I mean, Robert Shapiro's statement was inaudible on February 7th of 1995 during the 14th day of the trial. So they got Johnny Cochran on July 6th to stipulate to it again. But Johnny Cochran, he has to do it vociferously out loud. And so before he's willing to stipulate to this 9:37 p.m. phone call, he raises a issue under what is called a 352 argument. And a 352 argument in the California trial system is a part of the code that deals with lawyers arguing the merits of an individual entering evidence that is either prejudicial or probative. And if such evidence is prejudicial, then it should not be allowed to come in to impact the jury. So Johnny Cochran asked Judge Ito, he says, before I stipulate, I want to present a 352 argument on, in essence, on these exhibits, which were exhibits of the murdered individuals at the murder site. Now, when we look at Cochran doing this on July 6, 1995, these photographs had already been shown to the jury previously. He states that in his argument. It makes me wonder, well, why was it necessary for him to go through it again? You know, but he does. So he's making this argument to the judge. Now, Judge, we don't need to show the jury these bloody photographs. After all, the last time that we did that, you had to adjourn the session for 15 minutes for the people to go out and collect themselves and start over again. So At this point, all we need to say is that photo 356 is a photo of Ron Goldman. He's been stabbed to death, and photo 358 is one of Nicole Brown Simpson. These photos are very, very prejudicial to the jury, and they should not be shown to the jury. And then, in ending his remarks, he says, "After all, Your Honor, we're not going to show them other evidence in the case. We decided that we're not going to show them the telephone records."
Oh, really?
That's right. Look at the documentary, and you'll see it. Not only do we show you the murdered victims in the location where they're found, when he gets to that point of saying, we're not going to show them the telephone records, we run that back 3 times so you get it, okay? Now, the significance of this is that a judge that most of you have never heard anything about was responsible for aiding and abetting the removal of those phone records from the Simpson case file. Those records were never seen by the jury. In fact, Judge Ito stated on 2 occasions when the stipulation first came in by Robert Shapiro, and that same stipulation to that same evidence came in 5 months later by Johnny Cochran, he admonished the jury. Now, you remember I told you in the jury room, you don't have to believe anything that these attorneys say. But any time the 2 attorneys stipulate, meaning agree to a fact, you're to accept that as evidence. And otherwise, you can't examine it. You cannot act as the exclusive trier of fact. You cannot examine and question that evidence. You must accept it as evidence in the case. Now let's move on. Okay? Now, that judge who signed the court order when this organization began to raise the issue that we would like to examine those phone records, when that issue came up and it was just talk before we arrived in Los Angeles downtown to actually examine the file, the lead prosecutor, William Hodgman, sought a court order for the permanent removal of all evidence in the Simpson case file. And he received that on the same day, signed by Judge John H. Reed. Now, the significance of Judge Reed is that we would include that in an affidavit and exhibits that we filed in San Angelo, Texas in 1999, in August of 1999. We had finally gotten Simpson to sign off to allow us to hire our attorneys to continue to pursue and dig up this evidence. And we had been told by employees at the telephone company in California that service the Browns district down there in Southern Orange County, GTE, that the tapes controlling the information of these records had been sent to their national headquarters, and their national headquarters archive department, which was over here in Southwest Texas, in San Angelo. So we ultimately filed a petition to perpetuate evidence with the court in San Angelo, Texas, and it was sent out over to the circuit court for the Northern District of Texas at Lubbock under Judge Cummings. And Judge Cummings denied us and said, in essence, I know you people can find another federal court of competent jurisdiction. And I took that to mean get out of Texas and take this madness back to California. So in the midst of that, this whole thing about OJ Simpson was split in half. You had people who were arguing on the internet that he was guilty. You had people on the other side arguing that he was innocent, that he had been framed. Well, in the midst of that debate, certain people went and got this information, and they came back with this information online at this particular site where you had the no Jays and the pro Jays arguing with each other and said, you know, here's this group that filed for these records. Why are they filing for these records? And here's this affidavit or exhibit where this judge has abetted the removal of all of the records from the Simpson case file. And that's when we found out, because someone said at that particular time in 1999, isn't this the same judge that sealed some information regarding this serial killer that had been with OJ Simpson's wife? And that was the first time that I had ever heard about this man, Glenn Rogers. And so within that time frame, between 1999 and 2000 is when we began to intensively look into this situation concerning these sealed documents involving Glenn Rogers. And because at this time, after 3 years of running this organization, we had developed our contacts within the Los Angeles County Superior Court, we asked the question, does this man, Glenn Rogers, have a case file in California? And they gave us the number, and we went to the death row appeal file section and asked to see the record. The first clerk couldn't find the record, and she was embarrassed. So she went to find a senior clerk. The senior clerk came back, middle-aged woman, attractive Hispanic woman with kind of salt and pepper hair. She didn't have too much to say. I guess she may have thought I was someone different than who I was. I was dressed in a blue serge suit and so forth, not California style, because I had just come back from the Midwest. So she looked me up and down, and the only thing she said was, "Follow me." And she took me down the hall into a room, and she, within 2 minutes, she wheeled out 2 grocery carts full of documents. And while I was reviewing the first grocery cart full of documents, I noticed that they were full of medical reports on Glenn Rogers. And as I kept going through these medical reports, I had come to the conclusion that these doctors were trying to cover their ass. You know, is that called CBA or something like that? Cover their behind.
CYA.
What I meant by that is that it seemed to me that these doctors were saying, this man here is sick. This man suffers from porphyria. But then when I went back to the medical office and began to pull down the medical books and examine this thing and went back and forth, this man doesn't suffer from the skin ailment, because porphyria has about 7 strains, you know, and many of those strains basically deal with deformities of the skin, dermatological problems. But the one strain of the disease, acute intermittent porphyria, which is commonly referred to as Mad King George's disease, because it caused King George III, who was the sovereign at the time of the American Revolution, to be locked away behind bars in Windsor Castle for the last 10 years of his life for his own safety and the safety of others. And that's how the disease, you know, came to be known as Mad King George's disease. Well, this is the disease that ultimately all of the medical records, not only from Los Angeles, but subsequently that I would find over the next few years of communicating with Glenn Rogers on death row in Florida, and he putting me in contact with his public defenders that handled his murder case. The medical doctors that were arguing, for leniency that he not get the death penalty, is pointing out this man suffers from a disease whose all of its symptoms are psychiatric. And once this iron-rich enzyme, heme, Heme, flows directly to the brain, the toxic effects that it has on the brain sporadically at that sporadic moment are all psychotic reactions, hallucinations, delirium, bipolar responses, and that a person can be very extremely violent, you see, and he can be very dangerous to anyone around him. And so it seemed to me that California was trying to bury this. And in the midst of burying that information, they also wanted to bury the information that would be brought out by the deputy district attorney who had pulled off the miracle of getting Glenn Rogers off of death row in Florida and having him brought back to California to stand trial. That was like a 1,000,000-to-1 shot. And nobody in Garcetti's office would even consider that was going to occur, so they didn't pay any attention to it. But the woman that they nicknamed the Dragon Lady by the name of Leah D'Agostino, very popular name, former deputy district attorney out in Los Angeles, who ran for that office in 1988 against Ira Reiner. She was the one who pulled in her political favors and got her governor, I think was Wilson at the time, to talk with Lawton Childs. That's the only way you can get an individual off of death row. You cannot have a person, what is the term? When a person is wanted in both states and then
extradited.
There's no such thing as extraditing a person off of death row. You've got to serve that sentence. But under executive order, executive request, they can get him off as long as California was willing to foot the bill. And so, let me say, all of the death row appeal file records with all of this medical information on Glenn Rogers was sealed by the same judge that aided and abetted the removal of the telephone records from Simpson's case file, Judge John Reed. So now we move over, and this deputy district attorney, Leah D'Agostino, she gets upset because she's been taken off this case. When Garcetti's office finds out that this man is coming back to California, they rush to her office in Van Nuys and turn her desk upside down, shaking it out, shaking out everything, and take her off of the case. So she goes to the Civil Service Commission to launch a civil servant's grievance. And Judge John Reed, the same judge that sealed Glenn Rogers' death row appeal file, that aided and abetted the lead prosecutor in the Simpson case, removing all of the evidence from the Simpson case file, seals the civil service grievance proceeding testimony of Leah D'Agostino. Now, I had an opportunity. That record was given to me inadvertently, just like Glenn Rogers' death row appeal file had been given to me supposedly inadvertently. His file was confiscated from me after 3 hours and says, well, we gave you the wrong file. Any file that's been stamped PC 187, we weren't supposed to give you. Okay, here, read this. Read the files over here. The file in the second cart was basically fluff, you see. But whether it was an inadvertent error or whether it was intentional, that's what I'm telling you is what was found in his death row appeal file, that officers in the state of California knew this man was mentally sick. Officers in the state of California that sealed, the same judge that sealed Leah D'Agostino's file, knew that Leah D'Agostino had stated in her documents that her investigators had determined that this man had been in intimate and close proximity to Simpson's wife as well. Okay? Now, this stuff that we're talking about, Cochran was aware of this. He was aware of all of this. as all of these people were aware of all of this, okay? I believe, though, when I look at it, that Cochran agreed to be a beard in this whole affair. And when I say beard, I think certain people need to be able to say, just like you asked the question of me, well, you know, why wouldn't Cochran use this information? If it was exculpatory, why wouldn't he use it as a leverage to free his client? Okay? I think, and this is only subjective. Now we're into the subjective role of all of this. And I told you before, I was hesitant to do that. But after you get through dealing with the objectivity, your thoughts about the subjective become fascinating. And when you can begin to examine all of these irregularities and you begin to kind of put them in pieces, you say, okay, what can I construct from this? Okay. So what I construct from this as it relates to Cochran and the Simpson and the Geronimo Pratt situation.
Okay, keep in mind we only have 15 minutes left, okay?
Okay. Is that the Simpson matter was not that important to Cochran. I don't think it was. I think the most important case to Cochran, after reading both of his books, was Geronimo Pratt, because Geronimo Pratt's name is very prevalent in both of Johnny Cochran's books, okay? And as you continue to go into the background of his representation of Geronimo Pratt at the height of J. Edgar Hoover's COINTELPRO program, where he was taking down the Black Panther Party and, you know, individuals that gotten killed in Chicago, Mark Clark and Fred Hampton in Chicago. There was a determination that they were going to destroy all potentially powerful, effective Black Panthers. And Geronimo Pratt, a two-time Purple Heart winner and Silver Star winner in Vietnam, they considered to be a serious threat, so they had to take him down. And so they were going to take him down by any means that they could, including lying. So what did they do? They brought in a former sheriff's deputy who was operating undercover. He's also a ex-con and so forth, named Julius Butler. And he had been a confidential informant, though he had lied and said he wasn't. He had been a confidential informant giving information to the FBI on the Panthers and others for 3 years, even before this whole thing came up with Geronimo Pratt. And so during Geronimo Pratt's trial for murder, in which they accused him of murdering a woman, shooting at her and her husband. The husband lived, the woman survived in Santa Monica. These people, including the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office and the FBI, knew that Geronimo Pratt was up in the San Francisco Bay Area, 320 some odd miles away from Santa Monica. The FBI had been taking photographs of Geronimo Pratt and had the Panthers' phones wiretapped at the time. So at the time that they were promulgating this trial of murder against Geronimo Pratt, they were suppressing this evidence that they knew they could exonerate him.
Don't forget also, Geronimo Pratt's wife was shot herself way back in like around 1970 as part of a COINTELPRO. The COINTELPRO FBI tried to make it look like it was due to the Black Panthers. It was that she was killed by the Black Panthers in order to cause dissension among the Black Panther Party for self-defense.
Right. Yeah, a lot of that was going on. But we're dealing in terms of the question is, what interest would Johnny Cochran have in suppressing evidence that could have exonerated Simpson? I think, and this is only subjective, that if Johnny Cochran had this type of information to hold over the head of the Los Angeles County justice system, they would have to deal with him, okay, or else they would have been exposed in perpetuating one of the biggest frauds of the 20th century. And I don't think that they wanted to face that, in my opinion. I also think that Johnny Cochran knew. Now, this is just my guess, but my suspicion is Johnny Cochran knew at that particular point in time that he had a tumor, and he had an inoperable tumor on his brain. And the amount of time that he had to live was questionable. So an individual that was in that situation there, that had been carrying a grudge against these people for 20-some-odd years, 27 years, that this man had been locked up and been made a fool of. And this man, Geronimo Pratt, had attempted to tell Johnny Cochran, this is not going to go the way you think it's going to go. These people are out to get me. Well, Johnny Cochran was young and naive at the time. He did not believe that. And then they made a critical error during Geronimo Pratt's trial, in that the witness who had been victimized had claimed that the people who had shot at him and his wife were clean shaven, but Geronimo Pratt was noted to have a goatee, and so his brother provided a picture of him with this goatee, and they said, well, he could not have grown this goatee in the short period of time between when this thing took place in December and the when he was arrested or something like that. So, which was the latter part of December, and so Geronimo Pratt. So Johnny Cochran and them went on the basis of what this photograph that the brother had provided as evidence. But it turned out that the prosecution went and got an expert that knew that this film, that this picture had been taken on, did not come out until 1969. And they're attempting to allege that this photograph had been taken in 1968. So when that came out, that knocked a hole in the credibility of the defense's case and allegedly set them back, and ultimately would lead to this individual being convicted. Now, over the next 25 years, his lawyer from Northern California, San Francisco, by the name of Stuart Hanlon, fought valiantly for this man's freedom. But everything that they would uncover and present to both courts, the state and federal, was dismissed as harmless error. And so when they get down to the final appeal, Johnny Cochran, it seems to me, is a little bit more easygoing about the situation. And these two are nervous. Geronimo is nervous and angry at Hanlon. Hanlon's wife is dying, and he's angry at Geronimo Pratt and so forth. But they're just frustrated. They're frustrated and angry at the courts and how they've been treated. But at this point in time, the appeal is put on hold because Johnny Cochran had written an article in a law journal called the California Review, where he attacked the former prosecutor of Geronimo Pratt, who had relied upon the lies and perjury of this FBI informer, Julius Butler. And Johnny Cochran said in the California Review article that he's going to eat him alive, and he's going to destroy his credibility and integrity on the witness stand. And so this judge, Michael Caldwell, comes out and says, well, I'm stepping down from this case, and I'm recusing every judge on the bench in Los Angeles, in the Superior Court of Los Angeles County. None of them can hear this case. And I thought that was very strange. all of the judges, you've got the power to stop all of the judges in Los Angeles County from hearing it. But this is what I think that Cochran wanted. And it's my feeling the only way that he could have gotten something like that was if he had the leverage of this potential embarrassment hanging over Los Angeles County, which was the malfeasance that they were involved in the Simpson case. Ultimately, the Geronimo Pratt case would be kicked back up to San Francisco, and then it would be kicked and given to a judge in Orange County, which was Judge Everett Dickey, who a African-American attorney described in the book Last Man Standing, which is the Geronimo Pratt story. His name is Milton Grimes. When asked by Stuart Hanlon, did he know this Judge Dickey? And he says, yes. He's extremely hard, but brutally fair. And in the end, even though he was trying to be influenced by everyone in Los Angeles County to keep Geronimo Pratt in prison for life without parole, he decided that based upon the evidence that these people had hidden and concealed that would have exonerated and obviated the need for them to even have this man put on trial 27 years earlier, is the basis for him releasing this man from prison. So ultimately, Geronimo Pratt was released from prison in 1997 after spending 27 years in prison. And subsequently, Cochran was able to arrange a $4.5 million settlement split between Los Angeles County, who had worked along with the federal government to frame this man, and I think he got $1 million from the FBI. And when Geronimo Pratt got out of prison, he made his home half the time. In fact, I think more than half the time. He left the country. He left his home city of Morgan City, Louisiana, and he moved to Tanzania, East Africa. And I think he died here. I'm going to say he passed away, I think it was 2011. I'd have to look back and check, see what it was. But it was after Cochran. Cochran died in 2005. So somewhere between 2005, may have been 2008. My mind says 2011, but either way, both of those individuals have passed on now. But we are still encumbered with the residue of the malfeasance that was promoted relative to the Simpson case, for individuals to be able to gain power, celebrity, pecuniary gain, and whatever other reasons they chose to put on this fraudulent narrative that they call the trial of the century.
We should call it the mistrial of the century, actually, or misjustice of the century. Mr. Johnson, you did an excellent job tonight. I can't thank you enough. We really, you tied up so many loose ends from the singular interview and from our last interview, and the whole, you put together the whole Geronimo Pratt story excellently. I can't thank you enough. I would definitely like to be put in touch with, we had talked off the air before with not Scotto, the other one, Stewart.
C.J. Stewart.
Yeah, C.J. Stewart. Yeah, we'll do another show in the future.
I'll send you an email for him, and you guys can talk. I can't speak for him, but talk to him and see what he's willing to talk about. Yeah,
I'm going to send you an email too with that information about the Mark Furman that I had from that woman. I pulled up the chat while you were talking.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I'd like to.
You're going to like it. You're going to like it. T.H. Johnson. He's the author of the book Pursuit of Exhibit 35 in the OJ Simpson murder trial and its hidden secrets, and also the producer of the film Serpents Rising, an independent investigation of the OJ Simpson murder trial. The links to this will be on the OppermanReport.com blog. Mr. Mr. Johnson, I can't thank you enough. You've devoted your life to this and put so much work into this, and you've really done a great service to the country in your work here, and I want to thank you.
All right, Ed. Thank you so much.
God bless you.
Take care.
Good night.